Welcome everyone, I'm Grace Korea-Kanja and this is Africa Matters. Now the world is becoming more African. In fact, the United Nations projects that in less than 30 years from now, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be from the continent. So the US elections on November 5th will be closely watched to see how they are likely to affect this burgeoning region and shape foreign policy. Now, the United States appears to be losing influence on the African continent in recent years. Many African countries have been turning to China and Russia for trade and investments. But the U.S. is trying to reconnect using a different approach. Isaac Kaleji reports on how the U.S. is now prioritizing key investments that target Africa's young population.
These young Ghanaians are taking computer lessons at this digital lab in Choko, a deprived community in the capital Accra. Some of them are using and learning about computers for the first time, building their digital literacy skills from scratch. The lab is an initiative of an American social entrepreneur, Patricia Wilkins.
We launched the program just a few months ago, and we've already had 1 cohort of students, and we've graduated 25 students with their first certificates in hardware and networking. Currently, we're running our 2nd cohort, and we have almost 100 students, and we have 3 classes.
American digital communications technology firm Cisco is sponsoring this lab. Expanding digital access and literacy in Africa has been a key U.S. initiative since 2022. It has led to increased commercial engagement between African and American companies in the digital sector. With a growing younger population in Africa, the U.S. wants to invest in the continent's youth while striking an equal partnership with shared interests. America's influence in Africa was substantial in the past, from funding major infrastructure projects, providing security support, and rolling out major trade deals. But a lot has changed. Analysts say that's due to the emergence of China and Russia.
Africa has not been a major priority of the United States in the past 2 decades, in that what we call the Asian pivot, where they wanted to counter the influence of China in Asia, made Africa a back burner. They put Africa in the back burner. But recently, because of issues including the population growth that comes with markets, resources, and the sheer influence that China is exerting in Africa, U.S. wants to counter that.
But the U.S. has lost a lot of ground to China. The Asian giant is now a major creditor and trading partner to most African countries, funding major infrastructure projects like this fishing harbor in Accra. In the past 2 decades, the International Monetary Fund says China has become Sub-Saharan Africa's largest bilateral trading partner. Around 20% of the region's exports now go to China, and about 16% of Africa's imports come from China. Russia is also pushing harder, especially in the Sahel region. Some analysts believe African countries need to combine their interests to get the best deals. And projects like this one in Accra may just be what the U.S. needs to rekindle its influence once more. Isaac Kaleji, Africa Matters, Accra, Ghana.
And U.S. President Joe Biden promised not only win-win partnerships, but to be all in on Africa's future. However, some analysts argue that the U.S. is not prioritizing the continent in its foreign policy now. Washington has traditionally advocated for democracy, human rights, and security. So let's take a look back at some of the major U.S. policies that have shaped the African continent in the last 2 decades. In 2000, the Democrat President Bill Clinton signed the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, which offers duty-free access to the U.S. market for certain products from eligible sub-Saharan African countries. Countries like Niger, Gabon, and Uganda have been expelled from AGOA for what the U.S. cites as gross violation of human rights or failure to promote democracy. But it's set to expire next year, and its renewal is under threat if America continues to adopt the America First trade policy. Also under threat is the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, a health policy launched in 2003 by Republican President George W. Bush. Now, PEPFAR reports its mission to end the HIV/AIDS pandemic as a public health threat by 2030 has saved more than 25 million lives by providing HIV prevention and treatment services. But President Joe Biden's administration cut funding by more than 6% in next year's budget. The Bush administration also launched the United States Africa Command in 2007 as part of a broader fight against terror groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh after the U.S. attacks on September 11th in 2011. Washington has at least 26 military bases on the continent, but the future of its counter-terrorism efforts in some places like Niger is uncertain after the junta closed its bases there and turned to Russia as an alternative security partner. In 2013, President Barack Obama launched the Power Africa initiative to try to double access to electricity across sub-Saharan Africa from renewable sources. Obama emphasized trade, not aid to the continent, but his military intervention in Libya has been criticized for leaving the country unstable. In 2018, Republican President Donald Trump launched the Prosper Africa initiative to expand U.S.-Africa trade and investment while countering what it has described as predatory Russian and Chinese influence in the region. That's about the time when the Kremlin became the continent's largest weapon supplier, while China had already surpassed the U.S. to become Africa's largest trading partner in 2019. The outgoing Democratic President Joe Biden pledged to invest $55 billion in the continent over a 3-year period, which would include climate adaptation and post-COVID-19 pandemic economic recovery. He also promised to visit the continent, but that hasn't happened yet. All right, let's hear more from Professor Eche Sikanku. He's an associate professor of journalism and international communication, University of Media Arts and Communication, Institute of Journalism. He joins me from Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right. So I want to start by talking about the two candidates, Donald Trump and, of course, Kamala Harris. So is either of the two likely to shift the U.S. foreign policy towards Africa? And if so, in what ways?
Thank you very much. Fundamentally, U.S. policy towards Africa would not shift dramatically. It would follow a general U.S. template over the years, which is to say that Africa does not often feature prominently in U.S. presidential elections or in the campaigns. However, once they do get elected and based on their disposition and their ideological positions or standpoints, their relationship with Africa is likely to be different. So, for instance, if we have Kamala Harris, a Democrat, getting into office, the traditional line of the Democratic ideology has been quite international, quite cooperative. They have a globalist outlook, an internationalist outlook. And so you can be sure that candidate or a President Kamala Harris is likely to be somebody who would extend a hand to Africa in terms of a multilateral or internationalist framework. Somebody like Donald Trump is more isolationist and is more nativist, and as some people say, is more inward-looking in terms of his political ideology. In fact, the centerpiece of his ideological standpoint, as far as domestic and internationalism is concerned, is the America First principle, which says that the U.S. or local or domestic issues should take predominance over anything else. We've seen a Donald Trump who has been very, very reluctant to participate in climate accord agreements or climate deals. We've seen a Donald Trump who never visited Africa when he was president. We've seen a Donald Trump who has used very derogatory terms to refer to Africa over the past. And so he really operates based on a neo-colonialist mindset, where Africa is seen as a dark, gaping hole made up of people married in conflict, in poverty, and viewed within frames of derogation, frames that point to a continent that is marginalized and very derogatory terms used against the continent. And so that is the framework within which both of them are going to appeal, just in terms of the political, ideological outlook or standpoint. But beyond that, we can also say that Kamala Harris is human rights centered. Donald Trump is more in terms of more domesticate. He's nativist in orientation, and so you can expect that Kamala might be concerned about human rights issues in Africa, while Donald Trump is more likely to teeter towards countries like Russia or sometimes dictatorial regimes, as we've seen in his past or his previous term in office.
Right, but then, we are able to sort of like judge Donald Trump because of his track record as he has served as president. But we are yet to see what a Kamala Harris presidency would look like, though we've seen how she operates, especially under Biden. And granted, she has made 3 trips to African countries. But then the question would be, Donald Trump himself has had the Prosper Africa initiative. Do you think he would continue with such initiatives or strategies to the continent if he won, if he becomes the next president?
Yes, you're right. One of the major things that Donald Trump did was a Prosper Africa initiative to support U.S. investors and a growing middle class in Africa. But that has also been centered on the idea of competing with Chinese influence over here. He has not said anything that points to the fact that there will be a discontinuation of it. But what we do know is that Africa has not definitely featured prominently. We also do know that in terms of his position on certain things such as abortion, that is also going to affect the relationship with Africa, probably reneging on deals or agreements that have family planning initiatives in them. The Republican Party generally is not big on that, and so we can expect that would be one thing that would influence his relationship with the continent. But when it comes to Donald Trump, he's a bit transactional in terms of his relationship with Africa and in terms of his governance approach. So the first question that he probably would be asking would be, what is in it for America? That might dominate the kind of relationship that he has towards Africa. You asked about Trump. On the other hand, you said Kamala Harris has not been in government. But we do know enough about her position. I mean, her work as vice president. We do know enough about her from an ideological standpoint of view, and also from her partisan viewpoint. This was the party, the Democratic Party, that brought in the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA,
Right.
and that policy has been continued by a lot of U.S. Governments, irrespective of the political party. And so it is expected that they will maintain that policy. We also expect to see a Kamala Harris who will be interested more in philanthropic initiatives in Africa.
Right. I want us to come back to what you mentioned in the beginning there. You talked about China and Russia and the influence that it has on Africa and sort of like how it's become a threat to the U.S. hegemony on the continent. But then how can African leaders capitalize on this? Because everybody wants a share of Africa. Everybody is competing for Africa. China, Russia, the United States. So how can African leaders capitalize this?
Well, I do think that this would be a very good opportunity for African governments, African presidents, to be able to make better negotiations, to make better deals. It would be a good chance to also put Africa or African interests at the forefront of any sort of bilateral or multilateral agreements that are had. It's very important that even within the continent, when you look at the foreign policy initiatives, when you look at their international plans and their international policies, it's very important and critical that African leaders themselves go to that bilateral and multilateral table with policies, with initiatives that will stand to the benefit of the people of the continent in and of itself. It is important not to just think about what is going to be beneficial to the leaders or to the political leadership or hegemony itself, but when we talk about those negotiations or those deals with China, for instance, the mining of natural resources, some of the conditions under which the loans or the trade deals are given, the question is, has Africa looked out for itself? And that is the next step where our leaders should begin to make sure that they prioritize the needs and the future of the continent when they get into such bilateral and relationships with countries such as the United States.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Eche Sikanku there. Thank you so much for your time and contribution.
Thank you very much.
Still to come here on Africa Matters.
Transport in sub-Saharan Africa is expensive because of low-grade mobility systems. I am Darren Alan Cheine in Uganda's capital Kampala, where the government is looking to ease transport via rail with help from a Turkish construction firm.
We turn to BRICS now, which has concluded this year's summit in the Russian city of Kazan. The bloc is made up of major developing countries that have a combined population of over 3.5 billion people and controls nearly 30% of the global GDP. It officially expanded this year to include 3 African nations, among others offering the continent an unprecedented opportunity. Henok Teshfaye finds out what the impact has been for one of its newest members and brings us this report from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa.
Like many countries on the continent, Ethiopia mainly exports raw commodities, but it could move towards industrialization with investments that add value to its products. And that was a major theme in Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's speech to his fellow BRICS members at a recent business forum in Moscow.
Ethiopia is endowed with abundant natural and agricultural resources, offering access to large and diverse markets across Africa and beyond. This advantage is further strengthened by our national airline, the largest airline in Africa and a leader in international cargo and passenger transport. Coupled with a young, skilled and trainable workforce, positions Ethiopia as an attractive destination for investment.
The latest National Bank of Ethiopia report showed that BRICS members, China and India, both accounted for 7.6% of the country's exporters and about half of the country's importers. Egypt accounted for almost a third of all importers from the African continent, despite diplomatic tensions with Addis Ababa, with South Africa accounting for slightly less than 10%. The country also has an infrastructure and bilateral currency swap agreement with the United Arab Emirates, which also joined BRICS this year. But analysts suggest that shared experience and expertise could help boost trade.
BRICS countries are above us in terms of investment in technology. They have better processing, and in terms of even financial muscles, they're better than us. Why don't we open up and request the BRICS members to come and make the investment and say, here, we have opened our space, come and make the investment.
About 17 African countries have either expressed interest or applied to join BRICS. They hope to tap into the group's new development bank launched in 2015, which aims to fund infrastructure projects in emerging economies and promote the use of local currencies among BRICS members, something that Russia is pushing for.
The increase in payments in national currencies allows for the reduction of debt service charge and increases the financial independence of the BRICS member states.
The country is keen to start processing locally agricultural products like coffee and oilseeds, which make up about 80% of total exporters. And it's hoping more investments from BRICS Plus members will help put its vision within reach. Henok Teshfaye, Africa Matters, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Most African countries lack adequate transport networks, which makes the movement of people and goods costly and difficult. In Uganda, the government has reached a deal with a Turkish corporation to create a 272-kilometer electric railway system to help it elevate its economy and meet 21st century demands. Darren Alan Chayune brings us this story from Kampala.
This is one of Uganda's busiest bonded warehouses. Most of the goods here are transported by road from Kenya's coastal port of Mombasa and Kampala. However, the freight business along this route is not smooth.
The systems and the technological infrastructure we are dealing with, especially at the border points, sometimes is not reliable. You can have system downtimes, and so processing cargo past the border points can take longer than it's supposed to. So sometimes the transit time is elongated by that.
But the Ugandan government seems to have found a better solution. It signed an agreement with Turkish construction firm Yapi Makezi to build a section of Ugandan standard gauge railway from the capital Kampala to its border with Kenya.
With the capacity to transport 25 million tons of cargo annually, this project will reduce transportation costs, increase efficiency, and unlock the economic potential of Uganda and its neighbors.
It currently costs about $2,500 and takes about a week to move a standard container of goods by road from port city of Mombasa to Kampala. By shifting cargo to faster rail, the freight cost and time are expected to reduce by almost half, according to experts. However, that will cost Uganda about $3 billion over a 4-year period.
Since 1970, Turkish contractors have completed more than 12,000 projects in 135 countries. Their business volume abroad has reached $511 billion. Africa constitutes more than 17% of this amount.
The Ugandan government plans to finance the project by using resources from domestic and international lenders after Chinese investors pulled out. Upon completion, it's expected to be part of a planned 1,724-kilometer standard gauge railway network that will connect it to Kenya, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Rwanda, and that's because Uganda is a landlocked country and mostly relies on roads for transport. By creating 6 new passenger stations, the planned electric railway system will reduce traffic and carbon emissions and also offer quicker and safer movement of people. Darren Alan Cheyune, Africa Matters, Kampala, Central Uganda.
To Nigeria now, where more men are challenging traditional gender roles and breaking into the female-dominated beauty industry. Kelechi Emekalam caught up with one of them who is holding his own, making bold statements in a culture where career paths can be limited by society's expectations.
At the heart of Wuse Market in Abuja, Ebere Chigozie is focused on perfecting a customer's nails. For the last 5 years, he's built a reputation in a profession dominated by women, winning over clients with skill and dedication. What started as a temporary gig has turned into a fulfilling career.
If you know what you can do as a living that will fetch you a good money, a genuine money, it's better you do it. You don't depend on anybody.
As for Ebere's female clients, they appreciate his attention to detail, often remarking on the care and precision men like him bring to their crafts.
I feel when I go out with whatever my nail tech does for me, I receive more compliments.
In Nigeria's patriarchal society, breaking into fields traditionally reserved for women isn't just a challenge for men like Ebere. It's also reshaping conversations around employment in the West African nation.
With the country's unemployment rate hovering at more than 33%, Nigerians are realizing that job opportunities shouldn't be limited by outdated stereotypes. Despite these barriers, the rise of men in the beauty industry is an encouraging sign of evolving social norms, offering proof that gender lines are slowly being erased.
This shift in perspective is crucial for broadening career possibilities in Nigeria's future workforce.
That is what we need to do. Government, in terms of building human resource capacity, NGOs, in terms of supporting that kind of transformative design, our school curriculum, in terms of building and training people from the word go. That mindset that this one is men's job and that this one is women's job. That mindset is how do we transform it?
The beauty industry plays a vital role in Nigeria's economy, generating employment and encouraging entrepreneurship. The success of men in the beauty business shows that diversity not only enriches the industry, but also has the potential to inspire broader social change. Kelechi Emekalam, Africa Matters, Abuja.
That's our show this week. Share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode, or ideas on what you'd like us to cover on YouTube or on X using the hashtag Africa Matters. Thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me, Grace Kuria Kanja.